that Diana, Princess of Wales, has in fact been killed in that car accident.
She whispered with her last breath. They planned this. Tell my boys the truth. In the final, chaotic moments of her life, Princess Diana allegedly uttered a chilling warning, words that may rewrite everything we thought we knew about her death. This wasn't just a tragic car crash in Paris. According to a bombshell witness, Diana knew something dark was unfolding, and her final words weren't a goodbye. They were a warning. Was it an accident, or was it something far more sinister? Tonight, we take you inside the final hours of the People's Princess, her haunting last moments, the mysterious events leading up to the crash, and the secrets she may have died protecting. This story will break your heart and shake your belief in the official narrative. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It was just after midnight in the heart of Paris on August 31st, 1997. The city, illuminated by golden street lamps, was alive as always. Lovers strolled across the Seine, taxis zipped past night cafes, and the Eiffel Tower blinked in rhythm with the heartbeat of France. But beneath the surface of that ordinary summer night, history was unraveling in the most tragic and irreversible way. Somewhere in the bowels of the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, beneath layers of stone and steel, the life of one of the most beloved women on earth was slipping away. Princess Diana. The name itself evokes 1,000 images: a shy young girl in a ruffled blouse, an elegant royal walking beside Prince Charles, a mother tenderly embracing her sons, a humanitarian walking through landmine fields in Angola. But as the clock ticked deeper into that night, all those images began to blur into one inescapable truth. Diana, Princess of Wales, lay pinned in the wreckage of a black Mercedes-Benz S280, broken, bloodied, and gasping for breath. What truly happened in those final moments? Why were there whispers even then, barely hours after her death, that something was terribly wrong? And why, in the seconds before she lost consciousness forever, did she allegedly utter a phrase that still haunts history? They planned this. Tell my boys the truth. We begin this story not with the car crash, but with the woman herself, a woman who, despite her fame and royal title, lived most of her life under siege. Not from foreign enemies or political rivals, but from the very system she married into, and the tabloids that fed off her every heartbreak. In the weeks leading up to her death, Diana had been in a strange and defiant mood. According to close friends and insiders, she seemed both liberated and anxious, like someone who had discovered a dangerous secret and was unsure what to do with it. She vacationed with Dodi Fayed, the son of Egyptian billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed, traveling between the French Riviera and Sardinia, chased constantly by paparazzi boats and helicopters. But even as she smiled for cameras and waved from yachts, something in her eyes hinted at unease. She kept saying she felt she was being watched, a close friend later revealed. Not by photographers, she was used to them. This was something else, a deeper surveillance. Why was she so on edge? According to reports that surfaced years later, Diana had allegedly told confidants that she feared for her life. One letter she wrote to her butler, Paul Burrell, was especially chilling. This particular phase in my life is the most dangerous. My husband is planning an accident in my car, brake failure, and serious head injury to make the path clear. August 30th, 1997. Paris, France. The Ritz Hotel on Place Vendôme shimmered with its signature golden lights. Security teams from both the hotel and private agents patrolled its periphery while tourists and paparazzi alike lingered nearby. Inside, Princess Diana and her companion, Dodi Al Fayed, had just finished their dinner. The hotel, owned by Dodi's father Mohammed Al Fayed, was meant to be a fortress from the cameras, but by this point, even its reinforced walls couldn't keep the outside world at bay. They had arrived in Paris earlier that day from Sardinia, where they had been vacationing aboard the Al Fayed family yacht. As the pair made their way through the lobby that evening, it was clear they were unsettled. Hotel staff later noted the tension. Diana's smile was polite but subdued. Dodi seemed agitated, whispering with his head of security, Henri Paul, in corners and behind closed doors. Behind them, the paparazzi waited, hungry, relentless, merciless. Dozens of them had tracked Diana and Dodi's every move since their arrival, swarming the hotel entrances, clogging the courtyard with motorbikes, and staking out the back exits. It was as if they sensed something was about to happen. Or worse, as if someone knew it would. By 11:30 p.m., a plan had been hatched. In an attempt to escape the press, Henri Paul arranged for a decoy vehicle to leave the hotel's main entrance, while Diana and Dodi would sneak out the back in a second car, a black Mercedes-Benz S280. The driver? Henri Paul himself, who had allegedly been drinking earlier in the evening. The many now question how intoxicated he truly was. That decision, that precise moment when they chose to slip out the rear, would set into motion the events that would shake the world by morning. At 12:19 a.m. on August 31st, the Mercedes left the Ritz through the back entrance. Dodi sat beside Henri Paul in the front passenger seat. Diana and her bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones, took the rear seats. Surveillance footage shows Diana glancing back nervously, as if she knew the moment the car sped off that they would not be alone for long. They weren't. Within seconds, at least a dozen photographers on motorcycles were on their tail. The Mercedes sped along Rue Cambon, heading toward the Place de la Concorde, and from there, entered the embankment roads along the Seine, a dimly lit series of roads not built for high-speed chases. Inside the car, Diana reportedly became agitated. Witnesses close to the investigation later claimed she shouted at Dodi and the driver to slow down. But Henri Paul, for reasons that remain unclear, pushed the vehicle faster, reaching speeds estimated between 100 to 120 kilometers per hour. This wasn't just a chase. It was a pursuit, one with stakes far greater than anyone realized at the time. And then they reached the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. At 12:23 a.m., just 4 minutes after they had left the Ritz, everything changed. Eyewitnesses described a horrifying screech, followed by the sickening crunch of metal against concrete. The Mercedes entered the underpass, lost control, swerved into the 13th pillar of the tunnel, and came to a crushing halt. The impact was catastrophic. Dodi Al-Fayed and Henri Paul died on impact. Trevor Rees-Jones was severely injured but survived. Diana, still conscious, lay slumped in the back seat. The first people on the scene were not medics or police officers. They were photographers, some of whom chose to snap photos rather than render aid. One image, never officially released to the public, allegedly shows Diana looking directly at the camera, her eyes wide with pain and confusion. A few witnesses claim she mumbled something, some say a prayer, others claim it was the now infamous sentence, "They planned this. Tell my boys the truth." Within minutes, the French emergency services arrived. Diana was still alive, but barely. She had suffered massive internal injuries. Unlike in many countries, France follows a principle known as a stay and stabilize. Medics attempt to treat the patient on-site before rushing them to the hospital. They spent nearly 40 minutes trying to stabilize her before transporting her to Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital. What happened during those 40 minutes has become the stuff of conspiracy theories and whispered allegations. Several first responders later claimed that Diana seemed terrified, not just of her injuries, but of something else. She kept asking about Dodi, one firefighter said. She didn't know he was already gone. But even more troubling were the conflicting timelines. Why did it take so long for her to reach the hospital? Why were key traffic cameras in and around the tunnel either not working or their footage never released? Why did several witnesses later claim to have seen flashes in the tunnel, possibly from a bright light used to disorient the driver? As the hours passed, the world slowly began to awaken to the tragedy. By 4 a.m., Diana was officially declared dead. The hospital, under immense pressure from British and French authorities, released a statement citing internal bleeding and heart injuries as the cause of death. But for many, including members of her own family, there were too many unanswered questions. Why was she allowed to be driven by a man who, according to later reports, had alcohol and prescription drugs in his system? Why wasn't the vehicle better protected? Why wasn't she wearing a seatbelt, something she almost always insisted upon? And most disturbingly of all, what did she mean if she did indeed say, "They planned this"? As dawn broke over London, mourners began gathering outside Kensington Palace, leaving flowers, cards, and candles. Many were in disbelief. Some openly wept. Others stood in silence, their grief too vast for words. For a generation that had watched Diana grow from a timid young bride to a global icon of compassion, her death felt like a rupture in reality. A fairy tale, shattered in the most brutal way. Back in Paris, French authorities launched an immediate investigation, but almost from the beginning, cracks began to show. Evidence was mishandled. Witness statements conflicted. Security footage was incomplete. Mohammed Al-Fayed, grieving and furious, declared publicly that his son and Diana had been assassinated. He pointed fingers at the British royal establishment, alleging a plot to prevent Diana from marrying a Muslim man. a claim that would ignite years of public inquiry, tabloid speculation, and fierce debate. And yet, amid the noise, one thing remained tragically clear: Princess Diana was gone. But the world was not ready to let her go quietly. Not when so much about her death felt unfinished, unexplained, manipulated. In the days following her passing, as the British government scrambled to respond and Buckingham Palace remained initially silent, the public's grief turned into outrage. Candlelight vigils stretched for miles. The front gates of Kensington Palace were buried under a sea of flowers, photographs, and letters. Mothers held their daughters close. People, young and old, felt they had lost someone they knew, someone they trusted. Perhaps it was because Diana had never truly belonged to the royal machine. She was, in so many ways, an outsider. Vulnerable, flawed, human. But it was those very traits that made people connect with her, that made her death feel personal. And somewhere between the tunnel and the palace, between that final breath and the echo of her last words, a question began to form, not just whispered in backrooms or shouted in protest, but etched into the global psyche. What really happened to Diana? Because if she did know something, if she did utter that haunting line in her final moments, then maybe, just maybe, this was never just a car crash. It was a warning. And someone, somewhere, didn't want her to tell the truth. The news broke just after 4 a.m. British time. Radio stations in London began to interrupt their regular broadcasts. Listeners who tuned in to hear the latest songs or traffic updates were instead greeted with a chilling sentence: Princess Diana has died. For many, it was inconceivable. Some assumed it was a prank or a misreported accident. But as BBC, ITV, and Sky News picked up the story in unison, doubt turned into disbelief. Then disbelief became grief. At Buckingham Palace, the Union Jack did not fly at half-mast. In fact, it didn't fly at all. That in itself became a lightning rod for criticism. To the public, the monarchy seemed paralyzed, or worse, indifferent. For decades, the royal family had been an institution known for stoicism in the face of crisis. But this time, that tradition of reserve was perceived as detachment. The palace released no statement, not immediately. The Queen, Prince Philip, Prince Charles, and Princes William and Harry were at Balmoral in Scotland. They remained there, in seclusion, for days. Meanwhile, the public response was swift, emotional, and overwhelming. Thousands of Londoners poured into the streets in the early morning hours. By sunrise, makeshift memorials had begun to appear outside Diana's London home, Kensington Palace. Flowers covered the gates so densely that metal disappeared beneath petals and paper. Children's drawings, teddy bears, candles, and handwritten letters added to the swelling tribute. Many who left these offerings didn't know Diana personally, but felt connected to her deeply. She was, in their eyes, the people's princess. Television anchors, usually composed even during tragedy, fought back tears on live broadcasts. BBC's Martin Lewis hesitated during his monologue as he reported, "There has been a car accident in Paris involving Princess Diana. She has died of her injuries." Around the world, other anchors echoed the same grim message. From New York to Nairobi, from Mumbai to Madrid, the news dominated every screen, every newspaper headline, every whispered conversation in offices and homes. The international response was equally seismic. U.S. President Bill Clinton released a statement calling Diana a friend to the world's downtrodden. Nelson Mandela remembered her as someone who had the courage to confront prejudice. Celebrities, heads of state, and ordinary people expressed disbelief and sorrow, flooding media channels with tributes. The Vatican offered prayers. In Tokyo, people lit candles. In South Africa, schoolchildren planted flowers in her name. And then there were the boys. Princes William and Harry, just 15 and 12 years old, had gone to bed the night before unaware of the unfolding tragedy. It was Prince Charles who had to deliver the news in the morning. What exactly was said has never been publicly disclosed, but sources close to the family described the moment as one of shattering emotional devastation. The boys reportedly broke down, their shock giving way to a kind of silent trauma. Charles, himself divorced from Diana and publicly criticized for his part in their failed marriage, suddenly found himself having to console two boys whose mother had been taken from them violently and unexpectedly. Balmoral, typically a place of refuge, became a pressure cooker. The Queen reportedly believed the children needed privacy and quiet to grieve, away from the press and the growing chaos in London. But that decision to remain in Scotland was seen by the British public as cold, distant, even disrespectful. The newspapers turned sharply. Headlines like, "Where is our queen?" and "Show us you care" splashed across the front pages of tabloids and broadsheets alike. The monarchy, which had weathered wars, divorces, and scandals, now found itself facing an existential crisis. Outside Kensington Palace, the flowers kept coming. By September 1st, less than 24 hours after Diana's death, there were already 100,000 floral arrangements covering the grounds. Volunteers and city workers had to redirect pedestrian traffic. Crowds stood in long lines just to approach the gates. Some people fell to their knees. Others read aloud poems they had written overnight. One woman clutched a photo of Diana and sobbed. She was the only real one. It wasn't just London. Across the UK, cities became memorial sites. In Manchester, vigils were held in the town square. In Birmingham, cathedral bells rang every hour. In Cardiff, a choir sang Elton John's "Candle in the Wind," a song that would soon become the emotional anthem of Diana's death. Even children seemed to comprehend the weight of what had occurred. In towns across Britain, schools opened their doors early to offer grief counseling. Teachers led special mourning assemblies. Students who were barely old enough to understand death created tribute murals with colored pencils and glitter, writing messages like, "We will miss you, Princess Diana." The media covered it all. Helicopters flew overhead to capture aerial shots of the endless flowers. News anchors stood outside the palace for hour-long segments. Diana's past interviews were replayed on a loop. Newspapers released special editions. Every hour brought a new theory, a new quote from someone close to her, a new photograph from her final days. But beneath the coverage was a simmering rage. Many wanted to know, who was responsible? Fingers pointed everywhere. At the paparazzi for chasing her through the streets of Paris. At Mohammed Al Fayed for hiring Henri Paul to drive. At the French emergency services for taking so long to get her to the hospital. But increasingly, people began to look toward Buckingham Palace, not just for failing to respond quickly, but for everything that had come before. Diana's suffering had played out in front of the nation. The bulimia, the affairs, the bitter divorce. The royal family, long believed to be guardians of tradition, were now being cast as the architects of her misery. The Queen, faced with the growing unrest, finally relented. On September 5th, 5 days after Diana's death, she returned to London. That same day, she gave a live televised address to the nation, something she had only done on very rare occasions. Dressed in black, standing before a camera in Buckingham Palace's drawing room, she began her speech. "Since last Sunday's dreadful news, we have seen throughout Britain and around the world an overwhelming expression of sadness at Diana's death. We have all been trying in our different ways to cope." Her voice, measured and solemn, carried the weight of centuries of monarchy behind it. And yet, there was something different this time. She referred to Diana as an exceptional and gifted human being and acknowledged her role as a mother to Princes William and Harry. The Queen made a rare concession to public sentiment, expressing admiration for Diana's ability to reach out to the suffering and marginalized. Still, her words were seen by many as too little, too late. Outside Buckingham Palace, the public mood softened slightly. The royal standard, which traditionally flies only when the monarch is present, was replaced with the Union Jack, and it flew at half-mast. It was a symbolic gesture, one that broke with royal protocol, but it marked the beginning of a fragile reconciliation between the monarchy and its people. Meanwhile, preparations were underway for what would become one of the most-watched televised events in history, Diana's funeral. Scheduled for Saturday, September 6, 1997, the ceremony would combine royal tradition with elements reflecting Diana's unique public image. Her body was transported from Paris to London and taken to St. James's Palace, where thousands filed past her closed coffin. For many, it was the first time they'd seen a royal treated not just as a figurehead, but as someone human, someone beloved. The funeral route was meticulously planned. It would stretch from Kensington Palace, through Hyde Park, past St. James's, down the Mall, and finally to Westminster Abbey. On the morning of the funeral, silence swept over the city. An eerie hush fell upon millions lining the streets. Not a car horn, not a vendor's call, just the solemn sound of footsteps and weeping. The images of the cortege remain etched in the global memory. Princes William and Harry, walking behind their mother's coffin alongside their father Prince Charles, their grandfather Prince Philip, and their uncle Charles Spencer. The sight of two young boys, visibly grieving yet forced to maintain composure in front of cameras and the watching world, broke hearts. Later in life, both William and Harry would speak of that moment, how difficult it was, how conflicted they felt about being placed in that position. But at the time, it became a symbol of grace under unbearable pressure. Inside Westminster Abbey, the service was attended by dignitaries and celebrities alike. From Tony Blair and Hillary Clinton to Elton John and Tom Hanks, the congregation reflected Diana's broad reach. Yet it was her brother, Earl Charles Spencer, whose eulogy captured the raw emotion of the moment. Diana was the very essence of compassion, of duty, of style, of beauty, he said, his voice cracking. She needed no royal title to continue to generate her particular brand of magic. His words, pointedly critical of the royal establishment, struck a chord. He spoke of his sister's torment by the media, her struggle with mental health, and her relentless commitment to causes others had overlooked. Elton John performed a revised version of Candle in the Wind, originally written for Marilyn Monroe. The new lyrics, "Goodbye England's Rose / May you ever grow in our hearts," transformed the song into a global lament. Released days later as a single, it would go on to sell over 33 million copies, becoming the best-selling single since records began. As the funeral ended, Diana's coffin was taken to her final resting place, Althorpe Estate, the Spencer family home in Northamptonshire. There, on a small island in the middle of a tranquil lake, she was laid to rest privately. No media, no cameras, just family. Back in London, the mourning continued. The flowers outside Kensington Palace took weeks to clear. In total, an estimated 60 million flowers were laid across the UK. Hundreds of thousands of condolence letters poured in. Phone lines for grief counseling services were overwhelmed. British society, often stereotyped for its emotional restraint, had cracked open. In the weeks following her death, attention turned sharply toward the media. The paparazzi, already reviled by many, were now being blamed for causing the fatal crash. French authorities launched investigations, and several photographers were initially charged with manslaughter, though charges were later dropped. Still, the perception remained. Diana had been hunted to her death. Media outlets in Britain scrambled to distance themselves. The Daily Mail, News of the World, and The Sun all pledged to change their approach to reporting on the private lives of public figures, a promise many viewed with skepticism. There were parliamentary calls for stricter press regulation. Though no sweeping legal changes came immediately, the episode triggered years of scrutiny that would later culminate in the Leveson inquiry after other media scandals emerged. But the public grief was not solely directed outward. It turned inward as well, a collective soul-searching. What had the country done to this woman? Why had they read every tabloid detail of her life, dissected every dress, scrutinized every expression? Diana's death sparked not only sorrow but shame. A national reckoning had begun. This reckoning extended into public institutions. The Church of England faced criticism for not speaking out quickly enough. The Prime Minister's office, under Tony Blair, was lauded for its swift and empathetic response, with Blair famously dubbing Diana the People's Princess, a phrase that stuck and became part of the national lexicon. The monarchy, however, bore the brunt of the scrutiny. For days, there were protests outside Buckingham Palace. People demanded more transparency, more humanity. Royal advisors were said to be in panic, briefing the Queen daily on public sentiment. Some insiders feared that the monarchy might not survive the storm. It had survived abdications, wars, divorces, but this was different. This was personal. And yet, something remarkable happened. The royal family, slowly and cautiously, began to adapt. The Queen, often caricatured as emotionless, began showing more empathy in public appearances. Charles stepped more directly into a fatherly role for his sons. William and Harry, still reeling, were shielded from the worst of the backlash, but even they would, in time, grow into the roles shaped by this seismic event. Diana's legacy also began to take root. Her work with AIDS patients, landmine victims, and the homeless was not forgotten. In fact, it inspired a new generation of charity leaders and activists. The Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Fund was established, raising over £100 million for humanitarian causes in its first decade. Her sons would carry forward her torch in their own ways, William through mental health advocacy and homelessness programs, Harry through veterans' charities and work in Africa. As autumn arrived in 1997, the country began to settle into a new reality. Diana was gone, but her presence was felt everywhere, in children's hospitals she had visited, in the destigmatized conversation about mental health she had championed. and the softening edges of an ancient monarchy suddenly confronted with modern expectations. In the end, the national mourning did not just reflect sorrow for a lost princess. It marked a transition. A nation that had clung to tradition was suddenly forced to evolve. The stiff upper lip had cracked. The royal family, once untouchable, now had to be relatable. And Diana, in death as in life, had changed the very nature of royalty in the modern world. The final hours of Princess Diana's life are shrouded in a mixture of official reports, eyewitness accounts, and lingering questions that have fueled speculation for more than 2 decades. To understand the gravity of those moments, one must step beyond the headlines and into the reality faced by the emergency responders and medical teams tasked with saving one of the most famous women on the planet. It was during those hours that Diana whispered words that would haunt those closest to her, words suggesting she believed the crash that claimed her life was no accident. "They planned this," she reportedly said. "Tell my boys the truth." At approximately 12:23 a.m. on August 31, 1997, the crash occurred in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris. Diana, her companion Dodi Fayed, and their driver Henri Paul were involved in a high-speed crash while attempting to evade paparazzi. The only survivor from the car was bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones, who sustained severe facial injuries but was able to recount the chaos inside the vehicle. The first emergency services arrived minutes later. The response was swift, but the injuries were grave. The ambulance transporting Diana was crewed by Paris Fire Brigade paramedics who faced a daunting task. Despite the lack of advanced trauma systems then common in London or other major cities, the team worked quickly and meticulously. They initially treated her on the scene, stabilizing her spine, administering oxygen, and monitoring her vitals. Witnesses would later say that though she was unconscious at times, Diana regained moments of lucidity and, in those moments, made those chilling statements. The journey from the crash site to the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital was fraught with tension and urgency. The ambulance, speeding through the early morning streets of Paris, was met with the grim reality that time was running out. It was during this transport that Diana reportedly expressed her suspicion that the crash was orchestrated. Paramedics described hearing her mumble fragmented words about her sons, "Tell my boys." But the full context remained unclear until later. Upon arrival at Pitié-Salpêtrière, one of France's premier trauma centers, the medical team was already briefed on the severity of the situation. Doctors and nurses prepared for immediate intervention. Diana was rushed into the operating room where surgeons battled to control internal bleeding, primarily caused by a ruptured pulmonary vein. Despite their best efforts, the injuries were catastrophic. Throughout the night, the medical team was relentless. The surgery lasted several hours as they worked to stabilize her. Yet, time was against them. According to official reports, Diana's heart stopped multiple times during the procedure. She was given extensive resuscitation efforts, and at one point, medical personnel believed she might recover. But as dawn approached, her condition deteriorated. Several doctors who treated Diana would later recount the intense pressure they faced, both medically and publicly. Operating on a global icon brought unprecedented scrutiny. Every action was observed, every moment documented. They were fighting not just for a life, but for the fragile hope of a nation still reeling from the news. One of the most haunting elements of those hours is the ambiguity surrounding Diana's consciousness. Some reports indicate that she was responsive, able to recognize voices, and even attempted to communicate. Others suggest she drifted in and out of unconsciousness. Her bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones, who recovered sufficiently to give testimony, described how Diana tried to comfort others even as she suffered. Amid the chaos, Diana's final words, "They planned this. Tell my boys the truth," have been interpreted in many ways. Some see them as a desperate cry from a woman who sensed betrayal. Others consider them the echoes of trauma, the mind trying to make sense of sudden tragedy. Yet, no official investigation has conclusively proven foul play, despite multiple conspiracy theories that persist. The hospital staff were aware of the media frenzy building outside. Journalists had already gathered at the hospital gates, waiting for news. Hospital administrators struggled to maintain patient confidentiality while managing the intense public interest. Security measures were tightened to prevent intrusion and speculation. In the immediate aftermath, the news of Diana's condition was cautiously optimistic. Statements from hospital spokespeople hinted that she was stable, though seriously injured. However, as hours passed, hope waned. At 4 a.m., the hospital confirmed that Diana had died from her injuries. The announcement sent shockwaves worldwide. The British public, many still in disbelief, were glued to television screens as the news broke. In Paris, crowds gathered outside the hospital, lighting candles and leaving flowers. The world mourned a princess whose life had been cut tragically short. Yet, even in death, Diana's final hours continue to be dissected. Questions remain about the timeliness of medical care, the decisions made en route to the hospital, and whether more could have been done. Some critics point to the fact that the ambulance did not have an onboard doctor and that the hospital was not the closest trauma center to the crash site. Others argue that the care was swift and appropriate given the circumstances. The autopsy and official French investigation, which included analysis of toxicology reports showing that driver Henri Paul was intoxicated, concluded that the crash was a tragic accident caused by reckless driving at high speed. However, the Fayed family, notably Dodi's father Mohammed al-Fayed, insisted on a conspiracy involving British intelligence agencies. This theory posited that Diana was targeted because she knew sensitive information, or because her relationship with Dodi threatened political interests. These claims were examined in the British Operation Paget inquiry, which ultimately dismissed conspiracy theories as unfounded, concluding the crash was an accident. Still, these official conclusions have done little to quell public fascination or the emotional weight of Diana's final moments. To those who were with her, her whispered pleas were more than words. They were a call to remember, to seek the truth behind the tragedy. Princess Diana's final hours were filled with pain and uncertainty, but also with a haunting message that resonates decades later, a mother's last wish to protect her children and to reveal a truth she believed was concealed from the world. Understanding those last moments gives us a window into a life lived under relentless scrutiny and the mysterious circumstances that ended it. As we reflect on that night, the sorrow deepens, but so does the desire to honor her memory by uncovering what really happened, and by cherishing the compassion she inspired in all who knew her. Princess Diana's reported last words, "They planned this. Tell my boys the truth," have haunted the public imagination for nearly 3 decades. These chilling statements, whispered in the fragile moments before she passed, have fueled endless speculation, conspiracy theories, and deep emotional reflection. But what did she mean? Who was she referring to? And why did those words carry such weight? To start, it is important to place these words in the context of Diana's life and circumstances in 1997. She was a woman who had lived under relentless public scrutiny, navigating complex relationships with the British royal family, the media, and political forces. Her marriage to Prince Charles had ended in divorce, but she remained a beloved figure globally. In the years leading up to her death, Diana had expressed fears for her safety, worrying about the invasive paparazzi and the pressures of her public role. Reports suggest that in the moments after the crash, Diana was semi-conscious, aware enough to voice her suspicions that the accident was no mere tragedy but a deliberate act. "They planned this," she said, words that imply a sinister, premeditated plot. The ambiguity of "they" has led to widespread theories implicating different parties: the British intelligence services, the royal establishment, the paparazzi, or even other shadowy figures with unknown motives. Understanding why Diana might have believed in a conspiracy requires examining the atmosphere she was living in. By 1997, she had openly criticized the royal family's handling of her personal life and had cultivated close ties with people outside the traditional royal circle. Her relationship with Dodi Fayed, son of a wealthy Egyptian businessman, was controversial and viewed by some within the establishment as a threat. There were rumors that certain factions were intent on preventing the couple from marrying, fearing political or public relations fallout. Some insiders claimed Diana had confided in close friends about feeling watched and followed by unknown operatives. The famous interview she gave to the BBC's Panorama program in 1995 was a rare and bold admission of the struggles she faced, including her concerns over the media's obsession with her life. She seemed to hint at forces beyond mere paparazzi harassment, an implication of a darker, orchestrated effort to control her. The phrase, "tell my boys the truth," is particularly poignant. Diana's 2 sons, Princes William and Harry, were young and deeply loved by their mother. Her plea suggests she wanted them to know the reality behind what happened to her, something she believed was being hidden. It evokes a mother's protective instinct even in the face of impending death. The desire for truth for her children, and perhaps for the world, remains a powerful and heartbreaking legacy. For many, these words have become a rallying cry for justice and transparency. The public's fascination with Diana's death is partly fueled by the sense that not all has been revealed. Various investigations, both in France and the UK, have concluded that the crash was accidental, caused by the intoxicated driver Henri Paul and the reckless chase by photographers. Yet, the persistence of these last words challenges the official narrative and invites deeper scrutiny. Several conspiracy theories have emerged over the years. One popular theory suggests that British intelligence agencies orchestrated the crash to protect the monarchy from scandal. The idea is that Diana was becoming too independent, too outspoken, and that her relationship with Dodi Fayed threatened sensitive political relationships. Mohammed al-Fayed, Dodi's father, was a vocal proponent of this theory, alleging a cover-up by British authorities. Another theory focuses on the role of the paparazzi, whose aggressive pursuit may have contributed directly to the fatal crash. The intense media frenzy surrounding Diana was unlike anything seen before, and some argue that their reckless behavior was tantamount to manslaughter. In this light, they could refer to the photographers and tabloid press that relentlessly hounded her. Skeptics of conspiracy theories point to extensive investigations and the lack of concrete evidence of foul play. The Operation Paget inquiry in the UK, which reviewed all available evidence, found no credible proof of a planned assassination. It concluded that the crash was a tragic accident exacerbated by driver error and the high-speed chase. But why, then, would Diana herself speak of a plan? Some experts in trauma psychology suggest that her brain, in extreme distress, might have linked the traumatic event to fears she had harbored for years. The mind, trying to make sense of sudden, overwhelming pain, may create narratives that explain the incomprehensible. Others argue that Diana's final words were a deliberate attempt to communicate a warning or truth that she believed was being suppressed. This interpretation adds a layer of mystique and tragedy, painting her as a woman who knew too much and paid the ultimate price. It is important to consider the perspectives of those closest to Diana during those final hours. Medical personnel who attended her recall her attempts to communicate despite her critical condition. They heard fragmented phrases but were unable to fully decipher their meaning at the time. Family members, too, have expressed how deeply those last words affected them, fueling their quest for clarity. For William and Harry, these words carry a weight beyond public speculation. Their mother's plea for truth is entwined with their own journeys, dealing with grief, public life, and the complexities of their royal heritage. Both have spoken candidly about the impact of losing Diana and the shadow her death casts over their lives. In the years since, documentaries, books, and films have explored the mystery behind Diana's death, often revisiting these final words as a key piece of the puzzle. The phrase, "They planned this. Tell my boys the truth," has become emblematic of the unanswered questions and unresolved emotions surrounding her passing. What would it mean if Diana's suspicions were true? How would that reshape our understanding of her life, her death, and the institution she belonged to? These questions linger in the collective consciousness, inviting ongoing dialogue and investigation. Ultimately, Diana's chilling last words are a reminder of the fragility of truth and the enduring power of a mother's love. They compel us to look deeper, question more, and never forget the woman behind the headlines, a woman whose life and death continue to move the world. The hours and days following the tragic death of Princess Diana on August 31, 1997, unleashed a torrent of grief, confusion, and public outrage unlike anything the world had seen in decades. In the immediate aftermath, France, where the crash occurred, took the lead in launching an official investigation, but it was clear from the beginning that this would not be an ordinary case. The death of a global icon, under mysterious and violent circumstances, in a tunnel in the heart of Paris, sent shockwaves across the globe and triggered a sprawling series of investigations, allegations, and cultural reckonings that would stretch across years. Initially, French authorities began their probe with a focus on what appeared to be a reckless vehicular incident. The crash occurred in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, with Diana, her companion Dodi Fayed, and their driver Henri Paul all involved. Dodi and Paul were declared dead at the scene, while Diana succumbed to her injuries a few hours later at the Petit-Salpêtrière hospital. The only survivor, bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones, was seriously injured but would later become one of the key figures in piecing together the event. From the start, Henri Paul's role came under intense scrutiny. As the acting head of security at the Ritz Hotel, Paul had been entrusted with the safety of one of the most watched and hunted women in the world. French investigators quickly zeroed in on toxicology reports showing that Paul had been intoxicated at the time of the crash, over 3 times the legal limit, and that he was also under the influence of prescription drugs. The presence of paparazzi tailing the vehicle further complicated the narrative, with 7 photographers initially arrested and their role in the pursuit drawing intense criticism. The official conclusion from French authorities came in 1999, 2 years after the crash. The report stated that Paul lost control of the Mercedes-Benz due to his intoxication and excessive speed while trying to evade pursuing paparazzi. The accident was ruled a tragic but accidental death. However, that conclusion satisfied few, especially among Diana's admirers and Dodi Fayed's family. The lack of clarity, coupled with growing whispers of foul play, left many unconvinced that justice had been done. In Britain, the sense of injustice and unanswered questions grew stronger. The royal family's initially muted response to Diana's death only intensified public distrust. For several days, Queen Elizabeth II remained at Balmoral with Princes William and Harry, attempting to protect them from the media frenzy. Yet, the public interpreted the silence as coldness. Calls for the monarchy to publicly acknowledge the national grief mounted until the Queen eventually addressed the nation in a televised speech. It became clear that the British public wasn't merely mourning a beloved figure, they were questioning the institutions that surrounded her. People began to ask pointed questions. Why wasn't Diana better protected? Why was an allegedly intoxicated man trusted with her life? Were there security oversights, and if so, who was responsible? And most disturbingly, was there any truth to the idea that this crash had been more than just a tragic accident? In 2004, after years of public demand and relentless pressure from Mohammed Al-Fayed, the father of Dodi Fayed, British authorities launched their own investigation known as Operation Paget. Led by Lord Stevens, the former head of the Metropolitan Police, Operation Paget was a monumental undertaking. It reviewed over 400 witness statements, examined more than 1,000 documents, and conducted interviews in multiple countries. It also re-evaluated all forensic evidence, reviewed CCTV footage, and re-interviewed medical experts, journalists, and close acquaintances of Diana and Dodi. One of the central issues Operation Paget addressed was the persistent claim by Mohammed Al-Fayed that the British establishment, including MI6 and the royal family, conspired to assassinate Diana and Dodi to prevent a future marriage that would tie the royal bloodline to a Muslim family. Al-Fayed's allegations were sensational, but he insisted he had compelling circumstantial evidence, including Diana's own letters in which she expressed fears for her life. Perhaps the most explosive element came from a letter Diana allegedly wrote in 1995, stating that someone was planning an accident in my car, brake failure, and serious head injury in order to clear the way for Prince Charles to remarry. This letter, delivered to her butler Paul Burrell, added serious weight to conspiracy theories. Operation Paget took the letter seriously and spent considerable effort tracing its origin, authenticity, and implications. Despite the gravity of these claims, Operation Paget's 832-page report, released in 2006, concluded that the crash was the result of a tragic accident. The report reiterated that Henri Paul's intoxicated state, the high speed of the vehicle, and the aggressive pursuit by paparazzi were the main contributing factors. It found no credible evidence of a conspiracy or foul play and dismissed Al-Fayed's claims as unfounded. Still, this did little to calm the tide of public skepticism. If anything, the very scale of the investigation and the high-profile dismissal of conspiracies only added to the feeling that something was being covered up. A common sentiment echoed in newspapers, forums, and documentaries was that even if Operation Paget had uncovered uncomfortable truths, they would be deemed too destabilizing to reveal. In this way, the lack of concrete evidence became evidence in itself for conspiracy theorists. Public reaction during the course of the investigation shifted with each new revelation. In Britain, millions watched televised hearings and press conferences, analyzing every sentence for hidden meaning. In France, citizens debated the efficiency and transparency of their own authorities. Internationally, Diana's death continued to be a magnet for speculation, with new books, films, and investigative reports released regularly, each purporting to uncover the real story behind her death. Journalists played a dual role in shaping public reaction. On one hand, the press was partially blamed for the crash, with images of paparazzi motorbikes chasing Diana's car haunting public memory. On the other hand, the same media outlets that chased her in life became platforms for posthumous vindication. From exclusive interviews with key witnesses to serialized exposés, the media helped keep the conversation alive. Television documentaries often feature dramatic reenactments of the crash, forensic breakdowns, and interviews with friends and experts, all of which contributed to the sense that this was a case far from closed. At the grassroots level, public reaction manifested in ways that stunned even seasoned royal observers. People across Britain and around the world left flowers, candles, letters, and mementos at the gates of Kensington Palace. Tens of thousands gathered for vigils. The sheer scale of mourning transformed the narrative of Diana's death from a personal tragedy to a national trauma. Even years later, anniversaries of Diana's death continued to draw massive public attention. Each year brought new theories, renewed calls for transparency, and debates over how her legacy should be honored. For many, the investigations failed to answer the most pressing question. Not merely how Diana died, but why the events leading to her death were allowed to unfold the way they did. The impact on her sons, Princes William and Harry, became a focal point of public interest and concern. Their stoic presence at her funeral, walking behind her coffin in a procession broadcast globally, became one of the most iconic and heartbreaking images of the era. As they grew into adulthood, both men would speak candidly about the trauma of losing their mother and their dissatisfaction with how her death was handled publicly. Harry, in particular, has voiced skepticism over the media's role and the systemic failings that contributed to the tragedy. In 2007 and 2008, a full inquest into Diana's death was finally held in the UK, a legal requirement due to the unexplained nature of her demise. The inquest, held at the Royal Courts of Justice, lasted over 6 months and involved 250 witnesses. In April 2008, the jury returned a verdict of unlawful killing due to the gross negligence of both Henri Paul and the paparazzi. This verdict, while still not supporting conspiracy claims, diverged from the earlier narrative of mere accidental death, acknowledging a more nuanced blend of personal and systemic failures. This verdict offered a measure of closure for some, but it also left lingering ambiguities. Unlawful killing suggests responsibility but does not point to a singular cause or individual. It was a ruling that straddled the line between accident and culpability, feeding the idea that multiple forces, incompetence, negligence, media frenzy, and poor judgment converged fatally that night. In hindsight, the investigations into Diana's death exposed far more than the circumstances of the crash itself. They laid bare the deeply flawed systems, security procedures, media ethics, royal protocol that allowed such a preventable tragedy to happen. They exposed cultural divides over class, race, and privilege. And they reminded the world how deeply people can feel the loss of someone they never knew, simply because her life resonated so widely and deeply. Despite the thousands of pages of official documents, despite years of probing, and despite numerous public statements, the sentiment remains for many that the full truth may never be known. Diana's death, and the investigations that followed, have become part of a larger narrative about power, secrecy, and vulnerability. They reflect a collective suspicion that behind the velvet curtain of royalty lies a much darker, unspoken reality. As the world moves further from 1997, newer generations encounter Diana's story with fresh eyes, unburdened by the immediacy of her fame, but still captivated by the mystique surrounding her life and death. The investigations into her final moments remain both a roadmap and a warning. A testament to what happens when celebrity, royalty, and secrecy collide in the harsh glare of a global spotlight. For Prince Harry, the death of his mother was not just a historical event or a media story. It was the defining trauma of his life. The youngest son of Princess Diana and Prince Charles, Harry was only 12 years old when his mother died, too young to fully process the devastating loss, yet old enough to grasp the magnitude of what had been taken from him. Unlike many royal tragedies that unfold behind closed palace doors, Diana's death played out on the global stage, casting a long, unshakable shadow over Harry's childhood, adolescence, and eventually his adult life. From an early age, Harry's relationship with the media was complicated, to say the least. The same tabloids that had hounded his mother relentlessly now turned their attention to him. Every misstep, every outburst, every sign of grief was dissected and sensationalized. Harry grew up caught between the role of the grieving son and the target of intense public scrutiny. The trauma of losing Diana was compounded by a royal culture that prized stoicism and discretion, often at odds with the emotional turmoil he carried inside. As he matured, Harry began to seek answers about the circumstances surrounding his mother's death, not just from the official reports, but from the people around him, and eventually from the institutions charged with protecting his family. It was a deeply personal quest, driven by a need to understand not only how she died, but why. Why had the security arrangements failed? Why had the paparazzi been allowed to chase her? Why had the official narrative shifted so many times, leaving him with more questions than answers? In numerous interviews over the years, Harry has spoken candidly about the impact of his mother's death on his mental health and worldview. In 2017, he revealed for the first time in a public forum that he had sought therapy to cope with the grief and trauma. This was a groundbreaking admission in a royal family long known for its silence on mental health issues. Harry's openness broke taboos and helped foster a broader conversation about emotional vulnerability, grief, and healing. Harry's emotional journey was not without conflict. His relationship with the royal institution became increasingly strained as he navigated the weight of his family's legacy and the pressures of public life. Many of his decisions, including stepping back from royal duties and moving abroad with his wife Meghan Markle, were influenced by his desire to escape the toxic media environment that had contributed to his mother's suffering and death. One of the most poignant aspects of Harry's quest has been his determination to uncover the truth behind the official accounts. While he has never publicly embraced conspiracy theories, he has expressed skepticism about how the investigations were conducted and whether all the facts were fully disclosed. In his memoir and interviews, Harry alluded to feeling that certain truths remained hidden or minimized to protect the monarchy's image. His quest for answers took on a symbolic weight when he visited the site of the crash in Paris. The Pont de l'Alma tunnel, now marked by the Flame of Liberty Memorial, became a pilgrimage site not just for mourning fans, but for Harry himself. The visit was an act of personal reckoning, a way to connect with his mother's memory, to confront the place where her life ended, and to publicly acknowledge the unresolved grief that lingered. Beyond his personal reflections, Harry's quest also influenced public discourse. By speaking openly about his trauma and skepticism, he encouraged others to question established narratives and to seek greater transparency. His willingness to confront painful family history inspired discussions on how institutions handle tragedy, trauma, and accountability. In many ways, Harry's emotional journey has been a catalyst for change. His advocacy for mental health awareness and his critiques of media intrusion have sparked important conversations within the royal family and beyond. He has become a spokesperson for a new generation grappling with inherited wounds and demanding honesty from those in power. Yet, Harry's quest has also highlighted the limitations and challenges of confronting a legacy steeped in secrecy and tradition. The monarchy's guarded response to his questions, and the media's continued obsession with royal drama, have often left him isolated and misunderstood. His efforts to push for clarity and compassion have sometimes been met with resistance from within the institution that shaped his upbringing. Despite these challenges, Harry's determination to seek truth and healing remains unwavering. His journey underscores the profound human cost of public life and the enduring need for empathy in the face of tragedy. Through his emotional quest, Harry has transformed personal loss into a broader call for transparency, compassion, and change. As the story of Diana's death continues to captivate the world, Prince Harry's journey reminds us that behind every headline and investigation are real people grappling with loss, longing, and the search for justice. His quest is far from over, and it serves as a powerful testament to the enduring impact of a mother's love and the courage it takes to demand the truth. For centuries, the British royal family has projected an image of resilience, order, and unity, a carefully curated institution that stands above the turmoil of everyday life. However, beneath the surface of this tradition-laden institution lies a complex network of personal relationships, generational conflicts, and internal power struggles. Nowhere was this more apparent than in the way the royal family responded to the suspicions and emotional turbulence stirred up by Prince Harry's private quest for the truth about his mother's death. Prince Harry's mounting inquiries and the persistent rumors surrounding his paternity created a deep undercurrent of unease within palace walls. The royal family, bound by centuries of protocol and a culture of discretion, was ill-equipped to handle the vulnerability and emotional openness Harry brought to the table. His questions about Princess Diana's death, the circumstances surrounding it, and the whispers that King Charles III might not be his biological father were not just seen as uncomfortable, they were viewed as destabilizing. When Harry began pushing for clarity, particularly regarding the inconsistencies in the official reports and the perceived gaps in the narrative surrounding his mother's final hours, the initial response from the royal family was one of polite deflection. Courtiers and senior family members, steeped in a tradition that prized silence over scandal, urged caution. The prevailing message was clear: do not stir the waters. Prince Charles, now King Charles III, reportedly struggled most with Harry's need for answers. For decades, Charles had labored to rehabilitate his public image in the wake of his divorce from Diana and her subsequent death. The idea that questions about Harry's paternity could resurface, questions that had circulated since the 1990s due to Diana's well-known friendship with James Hewitt, was a threat to the fragile legacy Charles had built. Whether or not Charles ever doubted Harry was his son, he understood the damage such doubts could cause to the monarchy, to public perception, and to the institutional stability of the crown. Behind the scenes, there were quiet conversations about how to contain the situation. Palace aides were reportedly tasked with monitoring media chatter, discouraging journalists from publishing speculative pieces, and ensuring that royal biographers stayed within certain parameters. The unofficial royal motto, "Never complain, never explain," became more critical than ever. But while silence worked for prior generations, it proved to be a brittle strategy in the age of digital transparency and personal empowerment. Prince William, often seen as the family's steadying force and future monarch, was caught in an increasingly uncomfortable position. As the heir, he had been groomed from childhood to preserve the institution at all costs. He understood better than anyone the pressures of the crown, the expectations of the public, and the necessity of playing the long game. But he also understood his brother. The two had shared a childhood marked by the same trauma, had walked side by side behind their mother's coffin, and had grown up navigating the same treacherous terrain of royal life and media attention. Yet as adults, their paths diverged. William embraced the role laid out for him, working within the system to make incremental changes. Harry, in contrast, increasingly saw the system as part of the problem. His marriage to Meghan Markle, a biracial American actress, only intensified the divide. The couple's decision to speak openly about racism, mental health, and institutional neglect within the royal family, most notably in their explosive 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey, widened the chasm between the brothers and between Harry and the broader royal institution. Internally, Harry's emotional outpourings and public commentary were viewed by some in the palace as disloyal and reckless. But others, particularly among the younger generation of royals and staff, saw Harry as a necessary disruptor. His willingness to break the silence, to challenge outdated norms, and to demand accountability resonated with those who believed the monarchy needed reform to survive in the modern world. Queen Elizabeth II, the matriarch who had held the institution together for over 7 decades, reportedly found herself in a difficult position. As a grandmother, she cared deeply for both Harry and William. As monarch, she understood that the unity of the royal family was essential to the institution's survival. Though publicly she maintained a neutral stance, behind closed doors she was said to be quietly supportive of reconciliation. She was also deeply traditional, and Harry's challenge to royal conventions may have struck her as both heartfelt and threatening. The Queen's death in 2022 was a turning point. Her passing removed a key figure of stability and moral authority, leaving a vacuum that Charles had to fill, one he inherited at the very moment the family was embroiled in private suspicion and public controversy. Without the Queen's unifying presence, the tensions that had simmered beneath the surface became harder to ignore. Charles, now king, attempted to assert control. He extended olive branches to Harry in public, inviting him to the coronation, expressing love for both his sons in speeches. But behind the scenes, he also moved to consolidate power and reassert the crown's authority. There were private meetings, intense negotiations, and pointed conversations about duty, legacy, and the future of the monarchy. But the rift between Harry and the institution remained deep. Part of the problem was generational. The older royals, including Charles and Camilla, were steeped in a culture that prioritized image over intimacy, duty over emotion. To them, Harry's relentless pursuit of the truth, whether about Diana's death, media complicity, or his own paternity, was destabilizing, even dangerous. To Harry, their refusal to engage openly felt like betrayal. Further compounding matters was the enduring influence of courtiers and the so-called men in gray, the advisors and officials who managed the monarchy's day-to-day operations. These individuals, unelected and often anonymous, wield significant power behind the scenes. Known for their discretion and loyalty to the institution rather than any individual member, they have often been accused of manipulating narratives, suppressing scandals, and enforcing the royal code of silence. Harry, in his interviews and memoir, accused them of leaking stories to the press to protect other royals and of failing to defend him and Meghan during their most vulnerable moments. This internal power structure created an environment where truth became malleable and where emotional authenticity was often treated as a liability. For Harry, who had spent years in therapy and embraced the language of healing and personal growth, this was maddening. He saw the refusal to confront the past, whether in the form of unanswered questions about Diana or denial over the toll of royal life, as emblematic of a deeper institutional dysfunction. In contrast, Meghan brought a fresh perspective. Coming from a background outside the royal bubble, she was unencumbered by centuries of protocol and deeply attuned to the values of transparency and personal agency. Her influence on Harry was unmistakable. She encouraged him to speak his truth, to demand answers, and to prioritize emotional well-being over public approval. To royal traditionalists, Meghan's influence was disruptive. To Harry, it was liberating. This divergence of values, between tradition and transformation, between silence and truth-telling, came to a head in the years following their departure from royal duties. While the palace maintained its dignified silence, Harry and Meghan launched initiatives, gave interviews, and published a best-selling memoir that exposed inner tensions and challenged long-held assumptions about royal life. Each revelation intensified the debate. Was Harry airing necessary truths or causing irreparable harm? Amidst these internal struggles, the royal family's public response remained carefully calibrated. Statements were brief, often impersonal, and crafted to defuse tension without admitting fault. When Harry made emotional appeals or raised pointed questions, the family rarely responded directly. The strategy, as ever, was to ride out the storm, trusting that public attention would eventually move on. But this approach underestimated the extent to which public sentiment had shifted. In the era of social media, streaming platforms, and global advocacy, silence was no longer seen as noble restraint but as evasiveness. Many supporters of the monarchy remained loyal, but a growing segment of the public sympathized with Harry's position. They saw a man trying to honor his mother's legacy, challenge outdated norms, and seek healing in the face of institutional resistance. Even within palace walls, there was growing recognition that something had to change. Younger members of the royal family, including Princess Beatrice, Princess Eugenie, and even some senior aides, began to quietly express support for a more open, emotionally intelligent monarchy. While they did not endorse Harry's every move, they saw the need to evolve and to meet the public where it was. Still, structural reform remained elusive. The royal family, for all its pomp and pageantry, is a deeply conservative institution. Change comes slowly, if at all, and with King Charles determined to protect the crown and preserve continuity, Harry's crusade for answers often seemed like a solitary battle. In the end, the royal family's internal struggles reflected a broader conflict between the past and the future, between an institution rooted in secrecy and a world that now demands transparency, between the facade of perfection and the reality of human imperfection. Prince Harry, in seeking answers about his mother, about himself, and about the family he was born into, became both a mirror and a catalyst, exposing the cracks in the foundation and forcing the monarchy to confront truths it long tried to avoid. Whether the institution will evolve or remain locked in tradition remains to be seen. But one thing is clear, the royal family, once seen as infallible, is now grappling with the same questions of identity, truth, and legacy that Harry himself has faced for years. And in that struggle, the future of the monarchy hangs in the balance. For the British royal family, the media has long served as both a mirror and a microscope. It has glorified the monarchy in pageantry and triumph, but it has also dissected it in times of crisis. Nowhere was this duality more pronounced than in the invasive coverage surrounding the question of Prince Harry's paternity, a narrative that the tabloids could not resist, and which would shape Harry's identity in deeply personal ways from an early age. From the moment of Prince Harry's birth in 1984, speculation about his appearance quietly buzzed within the pages of gossip magazines and behind the corridors of palace staff. His red hair, distinctly different from the brown locks of Prince Charles and Prince William,